Welcome to the second ever episode of the Nevermore podcast. I am your host, Qu'Appelle, and I'm here with my brother, Francis Bueckert of Cloud Forest Coffee. And I wanted to give him a shout out for giving me this wonderful Christmas gift of a microphone. So I thought, what better use of it than to interview the person that gave it to me? But more than that, my brother has a very interesting story to tell. So I think that a lot of us want to dedicate our lives to doing something useful, something that hopefully makes the world a better place. And for those of us that understand how the economic system works in this world that we live in, then that necessarily puts us into conflict with the people who want things to stay the same, which is often big corporations, the rich, the government and police and army that exist to protect the property and profits of the rich. So let my brother take it away from there. And why did you start Cloud Forest Coffee?
Well, for interviewed me about this gives me a good opportunity to kind of gather my thoughts and just coffee. How did we go about doing it? Because it's good to kind of stop every once in a while and take stock of where you are and how you got there. I I I back in 2014. So it's coming up on about 10 years ago. And I started after getting it back from and basically the original reason I wanted to start it, uh, like I have to explain, found myself living in Ecuador when I was as a student. So basically, and we did a full year in Ecuador, where the first part of the year we did classes in the university there, and the second half of the year we got to do a placement of our own choosing that where we could learn development, and we had the choice to kind of explore working loosely based in Ecuador in the subject of self-driven community development. And when it was coming time for me to choose my placement, we were taking classes in the Universidad Andina in Quito, and we were drinking this really amazing coffee every day. And I started talking to my professor about where this coffee came from, and they told me it came from the Intag region. And it just so happened that this was a region that had also been victorious against in its resistance to mining, which was kind of a rare story, even at the time, where you have a community educating themselves about the risks associated with mining and actually gathering together, uniting enough to resist the interest behind the mine and successfully
Okay, so
to mining in their region.
I'm going
And
to recap.
so I knew right away that, like, go ahead.
I'm going to recap for you. So you're a student in an
Yeah.
international development program at a Canadian university, doing a year abroad. Then you were able to do a co-op placement in a part of Ecuador where there was a proposed mine, which was owned by a Canadian company. Do you want to say something about that specific region and the natural resources, both, mineral and biologic of that region?
Yeah, absolutely. So in that region, which is called the Intake region, it's in a biological hotspot. So it's considered one of the top 10 most biodiverse places on the planet. And furthermore, it's also one of the last remaining coastal cloud forests in Ecuador, which is a type of biosphere which is coming down off the slopes of the Andes towards the Pacific coast. And it's in between that mountain ecosystem and the tropical jungle ecosystem. So it's really unique, and there's just an incredible amount of biodiversity when it comes to like birds, animals, plants. It basically they can grow everything, and they have this incredible these incredible forests and incredible species of insects and animals. And so I also learned a lot about the region after watching this documentary that had been made by a previous Canadian student who did the same program that I did. And he made a documentary about it called Under Rich Earth, which really it documented really well the struggle that the community had against this Canadian mining company and how they chose a more ecologically friendly path forward, basically.
So the community rejected the mine. You want to say something about the community as well as the proposed mine and the company that owned it?
Absolutely. And so really more accurate, the community here is the word communities, because it's many communities that occupy this watershed of the Integ, which is, you have these rivers going through kind of these areas with steep mountainsides, and then you have various communities at different points along the river and kind of up in the mountains. And so the communities united to resist the effort to force the mining project into the region. Really, the mining is backed by, foreign multinational corporations and the elites who benefit from the tax revenue who live in Quito.
Which
So
just
you
happens
had,
to be what you were learning about as well. Is that
yeah,
right?
which just happened to be what we're learning about. And so really there was pretty broad resistance and opposition to the project, despite coordinated attempts by the company to bribe certain community members off, like kind of petty things, like they'd come through and they'd give some people dirt bikes, or they'd come through and build a basketball court and try and get community license to operate, or to try to get the social support to operate. And I don't want to gloss it over completely. Obviously, there was still division in the community about whether to pursue mining or not. Some people were in favor of mining because they thought that it was worth it for the jobs. But enough of the community kind of saw the fact that the majority of the money that from this project was going to benefit the elites in Quito and the company, and it wasn't going to stay in the community, and that most of the jobs that they were going to get were temporary in nature, which would exist for the duration of the mine. And then when the mine is exhausted, then the community is not going to be left with anything after that except contaminated rivers and contaminated soil. So really, I came along at a moment in the story where they'd been successful against the mining resistance. And when I lived in the Integ region, because to fast forward, I chose to do my placement in the Integ, which meant that I did one semester there, where I actually volunteered with the coffee cooperative there, which is called ACRI, which the coffee cooperative was directly started to grow and market the specialty organic coffee from Integ to international markets as a way of showing that there was an economic alternative to mining in the region. So it was explicitly political from its get-go, where the coffee cooperative was meant to be an engine of economic development that was an alternative to mining, and one that wouldn't leave behind a toxic legacy, and one that would actually be sustainable in the long run. And this was to be paired, this alternative vision of economic development was to be paired with tourism, as well as like both international and domestic tourism, because Integ is such a beautiful region. It's got vast potential as a destination, both for Ecuadorians and both for people from all over the world would love a chance to go to the Integ and to see
People
the
compare it to the
water,
Galapagos, don't they?
the rivers. It's yeah, and it's got the same type of appeal that they have in like Costa Rica or the eco-tourist destination. So basically, the vision for Integ, as opposed to mining, was organic coffee, tourism, and agriculture. Because agriculture is really the backbone. These are communities that are able to largely grow enough food to meet their own needs and sell to the cities as incredibly viable agricultural land, because they have this incredibly rich soil due to the fact that, one, it's so biodiverse, that kind of it's teeming with life, just about everything from mangoes to corn to potatoes. Like, why it doesn't make sense to tear it all out so that you can mine copper. It's just like, this is an area that is like a sort of like a jewel of the world and should be protected. And the people who live there understand that, but the people who are looking at making more tax revenue and looking at how much percentages of return on investment they can get, those are the ones who are pushing mega mining onto the region. So basically, I did my placement volunteering with the coffee cooperative, and I got to learn about how to plant coffee, how to cultivate it, how to make fertilizers to put on the organic coffee, as well as how to roast the coffee. And I was sort of able to get this holistic oversight of everything involved in the coffee production in Integ. And at the same time, I was writing my thesis for my program on economic alternatives to mining in the Integ region. So I tied it all together. And at the end, my professor was like, you should start importing coffee into Canada when you get back, like right off the bat, because she saw what I was writing my thesis about. And she's like, you're making a really good point. Basically, you should do it. And which is kind of funny, because it's not like it was not an academic project that she was proposing. It's like there was just a logical connection to be made.
It's meant to be, basically.
It was meant to be. And so when I got back to Canada, I spent a couple of years tree planting, was kind of hanging around working odd jobs in Ottawa, and I was trying to think about what I wanted to do with my life. And this idea really came back to me, and it felt like something that was not only important, but that would allow me to connect the disparate worlds of this rural region in Ecuador and the kind of hyper-capitalistic part of North America that we live in, like Ottawa, which really do feel like they're worlds apart. And to be able to kind of bring this amazing coffee to here, tell the story to people in a way that they're able to, it makes it more real for them if they're able to kind of taste this coffee and reflect on the story of where it comes from.
The Canadian company too, right?
And it's a Canadian mining company. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, my first shipment, I think it was 300 pounds of coffee, which is basically, it's not much, like it's not much more coffee than you can fit in a cardboard box. It was a tiny amount, but then we made connections with existing coffee roasteries in Ottawa, and then also in the Yukon, because I went to the Yukon at the time. And so the very first place whoever roasted our Integ coffee for us was Midnight Sun Coffee Roasteries in Yellowknife, Yukon.
Wow.
Which was quite a random connection. But then when I did settle in Ottawa, we had a relationship with some local coffee roasteries, and they were roasting the coffee for us, and we started selling it just kind of any way we could. Initially, it was just my friends and family, and I'd send emails out, be like, does anyone want some of this coffee? Here's the story behind it. and people responded really well to it. I think I wouldn't have been encouraged enough to like keep up with it if I didn't get people being like, this is actually really good coffee. This is something unique. This is something different than I've ever had before.
And then you told the story too. I think it was 2014 at the People's Social Forum. You were,
Yes. Yeah, I
so,
still have my People's Social Forum pin right here, actually. You
oh,
remember?
cool. Yeah, I
But
didn't.
yeah, so I, right when we were starting out the business, we attended the People's Social Forum, which was also very encouraging because people were very like receptive to the story, and like they got it.
You got
They
Rebel
understood.
Rewild.
Yeah, exactly. And it was the same time that you were doing Rebel Rewild, which people may or not know about, but was basically like anarchy camp, where it was like maybe I'm simplifying it too much, but it was out at a farm, and it was talking about like how can we rebel, rebuild, and rewild. And there too, we were able to have a lot of really good conversations about what we were doing, and all that was a very encouraging start. And like I know you personally, like you encouraged me to pursue this as well.
Yeah, I think it was multiple people too. I think it was I think Sakura probably Darius and Sakura probably deserve some credit.
Yeah, so that's another thing. Yeah, Sakura at the time was very active in Peterborough, talking about the actions of Canadian mining companies, and she kind of was and is the only person who's been really active talking about this extremely important issue.
Oh, there's
Um,
Watch, isn't there?
sorry,
There's Mining Watch, isn't there?
there's Mining Watch for sure, but like um, Sakura like was like I mean she was really putting a lot of effort in. She was organizing talks in Peterborough that were like happening once a month, and she was doing film screenings all about kind of the havoc really is being wreaked around the world by the Canadian mining industry.
For the listeners, the Sakura that we're referring to is a US born Canadian activist who is really famous worldwide. Actually, it's kind of crazy to think about because you just think of her as Sakura, but she's well known around the world as a prominent anti-mining activist. And she moved to Canada because most of the world's mining companies are based in Canada. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't realize this, but over now I'm going to misspeak, but I think it's over 75% of the world's mining companies are listed on Canadian stock exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Canada is
and so,
dominant in this industry. It's the only industry that Canada is dominant in.
yeah, yeah, and it's all concentrated around the Toronto Stock Exchange and the Vancouver Stock Exchange. And but the thing that people have to understand too is a lot of these companies are just taking advantage of the fact that Canada doesn't really have any regulations for the actions of companies listed in Canada who are conducting mining abroad. There's really, really weak legislation, purposely so that basically, if you're a Canadian mining company, you can't be sued, you can't be taken to court by these communities that are being affected by them in the global south primarily.
Yeah.
So to the point where even there are mining companies that are listed in Canada and they have a shell office in Canada, but they're not actually from Canada.
Yeah. And
If you go,
up to including using slave labor and
oh
uh,
yeah,
gang rape as a way of punishing um, community members who resist in Papua New Guinea, for instance. Just like the worst kind of things you could imagine a corporation doing, Canada will protect those people and provide cover for them more so than the US or any other country in the entire world.
yeah,
Correct?
exactly. And I mean, I was going to talk about the mining issue a little bit more because
But that might actually be better for a future one because we have these three questions.
okay, okay.
Number two,
let's
how do you conceive of your activism?
yeah, so basically my activism took the form of supporting this coffee cooperative. And that meant for us that we would want to support the coffee cooperative no matter what.
So you see
So
in a support role, not steering or strategizing or telling them what they should do or anything like that. It's you consider what you do to be in support of them, and you leave the decision making and strategy to them. Is that
exactly, exactly. Like I think what was so inspiring about the way that they resisted against this Canadian mining company was that they came up with productive alternatives, and they didn't just talk about what you could hypothetically do. They went out and started cooperatives that were able to like basically function to offer an alternative, and it gave the farmers who were already growing coffee in the region the ability to band together into a cooperative structure in which they all own the means of production with regards to the assets that the coffee cooperative has, like the infrastructure required for processing, drying, milling, and exporting the coffee. Instead of having just like um, the wealthiest family in town owning the coffee milling station, it was owned by all the farmers collectively. And they're doing that in a way where they're also organized and united in their opposition to mining. So really, they had a plan and they just needed support. So that's where I viewed myself. And then I was not the only one either. There's also people from Germany, people from Japan who are supporting the cooperative on the grounds of, yes, they have amazing coffee, but also on the grounds that, yes, they value the environment that is the environment that they call home, and they're doing their best to protect it.
mm-hmm.
So,
So it's
so
not
it's kind
just
of
about the product, it's about the story as well.
yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
and I think that that's one thing that you have done really well is to make the story central to your business. And one of the reasons that I wanted to interview you is because these days I think that a lot of people who do feel attracted to activism, because there continue to be a lot of people who are attracted to activism, have a sort of wrong idea of what it is, like I mean the worst example would be like canceled campaigning, where people think that they're making the world a better place by, ganging up on people on the internet. But also, there's the NGO world where it's not all bad. I'm not shitting on all NGOs, but there's a lot of fraud that happens in that industry, and a lot of dubious, fundraising efforts, uh and that's disappointing. And a lot of people do that for a certain length of time and then get disillusioned and then basically move on to like government jobs and stuff. And then there's also the type of activism which is just protest based, and often this follows the news cycle. If something's in the news, I guess right now it's Gaza, and this is super important. I'm not shitting on people who protest. I encourage people to protest. But a lot of the times that these things, they come and go, like nobody talking about police violence against Black people in the US right now, but do you think it stopped? Of course not. you know uh Occupy would be another movement that seemed to come out of nowhere, and when it disappeared, it kind of just, you know didn't leave a lot of robust kind of structures behind. And I just don't think that these kind of, I call it ADD activism, of people who move from one um, trending subject to another. And so I wanted to present kind of what you do as sort of the opposite of ADD activism, where you've made it your job and you're plugging away at doing it day in, day out. And I don't think that that's a lot of people who, are, I don't know, let's say in your position coming out of university and thinking about what they want to do with their lives. I don't think that a lot of people would probably um, be thinking like I need to start a business as a way of doing my activism. But as I'm realizing, it's like you gotta have a source of income in this world, And I think that I was always getting by with the least that I could. And, that's cool for a while. But at a certain point, you're like, okay, well, where am I going to be in 5 years? I want to, at least a cushion to sit on. And then also, I don't know, just what's your business strategy? Is how many people do you employ now?
We employ 11 people now. Um, yeah,
Because
like
you're also providing something to those people as well, right?
yeah, yeah. And I would say like we came at it. I mean, I came at it from a pretty ideological perspective initially, which was just that I'd like to support this cooperative by importing their coffee. And then I worked backwards from there to create a business plan. Be like, okay, well, how am I gonna do that? And so when we started, we did initially right off the get-go, we're like, okay, we're gonna have three branches of the business. It's gonna be one, we're gonna do events and markets, farmers markets, music festivals, like things like that. And then the other was going to be wholesaling to grocery stores and other cafes, bakeries. And then the third branch was going to be the coffee cart, which was going to be a bicycle powered coffee cart, which is the first way that we started selling cups of coffee directly to people. We set up the bike cart on the side of the road in the Glebe off Bank Street, and from there, I just learned as I went. Like we realized the coffee cart wasn't practical. Hauling everything on a bicycle behind you to to run a cafe and moving it every day is
Turns out there's a reason
actually
that no one else does it.
there's a reason that no one does it. Well, like people do it in Europe, but they live in like really dense neighborhoods and stuff. And the not everything's not as spread as apart as it is in North America. There's a whole lot of things that make it really hard to do things like that, which in other parts of the world are not unheard of, which is just like, I mean, even, you're in Mexico, just like someone being able to have a stall on the street where they make tacos or
Oh yeah,
tortas.
it's a free for
And
all.
it's totally like over there, you can do it. You put in your work and you kind of forge out a livelihood for yourself. But in Canada, there's all kinds of obstacles and red tape to make it a lot harder to do those kinds of I'm just going to set up on the side of the road with my cart and make a living. And so that's why that the coffee cart over time just morphed into us opening a cafe, because we realized that that's kind of how you have to operate here. Like
Hmm.
unless you're going to be really strong on the online, which I haven't I don't have the I mean, we're kind of the same in that regard. Like we're not super tech savvy with building websites out that are impeccable. I mean, you you're a writer,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, you can't do everything. But I think that one thing that you've done is because people see that there's more to your business than profit. Like I think I've called it a not just for profit business before,
yeah,
because it is a for-profit business, but it's not just a for-profit business. That's not the only reason that it exists. And because of that, and because I think people see that, then people have come out of the woodwork to help you quite a bit. Which do you want to talk about the Francis model?
yeah, the Francis model. Like I've talked about this before, and fake it till you make it. And I mean that really. Just if you start doing something and you're doing your best at it, people around you will tend to materialize who can help you carry out what you're trying to do.
I guess I could say that that's true for Nevermore. Like it really is. It really is. Because I
Yeah.
mean, chances are that if you have some sort of something that you're passionate about, then chances are that other people have something similar, but they haven't started it and they see you need some help and then they offer their assistance, which is something that probably doesn't happen in the corporate world. It's kind of everybody trying to get the most for themselves kind of thing. But I guess that we are running low on time. This has been a really interesting conversation. We've got 4 minutes left. Would you like to say what you want people to know about Canadian mining industry and any words of encouragement or advice that you have to people that want to make activism their job without working for an NGO?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I like that people should know is that there is a historic anti-mining movement happening right now in Latin America and around the world. And I think, for example, Panama, there was a recent victory of the anti-mining movement where basically the Supreme Court has ruled that a Canadian mining firm operating the largest open pit copper mine there is unconstitutional. And that was after like direct action all over Panama for over a year. But people in Canada are somehow so insulated because of all the corporate media and the social media kind of bubbles that they may not realize that, for one, all these transnational corporations based in Canada are causing a massive amount of economic, social, and environmental devastation around the world, and that simultaneously there is a social movement building that is resisting those Canadian mining companies. So I guess what I would say is that the anti-mining movement in general can provide a model for pushing back extractive capitalism. And this really is the big question of our time, is that like our current economic system of capitalism does not respect that you can't have infinite growth in the world, and yet we all know that there's finite resources. And so it's going to be up to humanity as a whole to push back extractive capitalism. And people are already doing it in the countries where they're being most impacted by it. So like, let's just take, for instance, in Panama, how are they successful in resisting this Canadian corporation, First Quantum? They blocked the ports. They blocked the highways. The company lost half its market value, which is the equivalent of $1.7 billion as a result of these protests. And so I want people to know that there's already a massive movement going on, and you can find ways to support that movement, whether it's in small ways, like just supporting a coffee cooperative that exists as an alternative to mining.
And by buying your coffee.
And by buying Cloud Wars coffee.
Buy your way to freedom.
Yeah. But I don't know, like I could talk for more.
Well, I think this was pretty much a test run. So
Yeah.
I think that that got really interesting.
It's hard to start. Yeah, it's hard to start.
I think the first 5 minutes would probably have to be probably completely redone. But
yeah,
I'll send you this file.
send me the file. Yeah,
Is it
I
gonna
can use
kick us
this
off?
to